do we overcome these physical constraints? Well, one thing to do is to start out and figure out how hard the problem are we facing. Is this a really, really hard problem that's going to require lots of money and lots of time and lots of people? Or is this going to be an easy to solve problem, one that's not going to require all of those things? And this is something that we can actually stop and try to estimate. We can find experts, people who've worked in the field before, people who've solved these kinds of problems. We can develop schedules. We can do a patent search, look at expert opinions. Those are all the kinds of things that can help us understand what's the nature of this kind of problem that we face. And often people just sort of jump off and do it out of excitement or out of ego, jump into a problem trying to solve it without really sort of stopping and saying, okay, what kind of problem is this? How hard is this likely to be to solve? Another thing we can do is hire an alien. And what I mean here is, well, let me just tell you a little story. I was once touring an insurance company, a health insurance company, and there were two gentlemen in a cubicle as we walked by, and the person who was guiding me around said, oh yeah, those two guys, we got them when they were working on the SETI. I said, oh, the SETI, like the couch that you sit on? He said, no, SETI, like SETI, the SETI project, which was the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And so what these guys would do is they would develop ways of looking. They had these radio telescopes looking into space, and they were just looking for intelligence, looking for some kind of signal that there might be intelligent life out there. And so there are electrical engineers, statisticians, people like that with those kind of skills. What kind of role do those people have in an insurance company? From the insurance company perspective, they certainly are aliens. And so as aliens in the insurance company, what they bring, the positive thing they bring is they brought this ability to look at large amounts of data and to begin to make sense out of it. And so one thing was, in health insurance, you might have a person who gets a prescription, then they go to the doctor, go to the doctor, get a prescription, then something else happens and they get a prescription again, they go to the doctor. How do we understand that? Are there patterns there? Are there things that we can see, really, really small patterns happening out of this big amount of data? And these particular aliens are the ones who could understand that kind of thing. And so you want to bring those people inside your organizations who have those kind of skills. And we talked earlier, from an organizational constraint perspective, for example, where these kind of people, it's really difficult to bring them in because we're not sure what they know, we're not sure how to work with them, we're not sure even whether we like them or not. But it's important that we do that. Next, we might let other people do the hard part. Eric von Hippel calls these people lead users. And so lead users are people who are really, they're not professionals, they're not people who are paid to do this thing, but they're people who are so rabidly into a hobby or into a type of product that they just can't be stopped. And so you may have a friend who is a bicycle nut, and he's got a bicycle that weighs 3 ounces, he can hold up with his finger and goes 100 miles an hour, is made of carbon fiber, whatever. But this person is not a bicycle manufacturer. This person is a consumer of these things, but who's always constantly tweaking and making it better, making it better, making it better. That person knows a great deal about bicycles. I also recall an example from a long time ago, it seems like long in internet years, where people were sort of fooling around with this thing called Wi-Fi, the wireless internet. Wi-Fi, and this one person had reported he had made a connection, a 2-mile connection on Wi-Fi. And that's pretty far given the standard of Wi-Fi is not that much, I believe it's like 300 feet, and not 2 miles. And the astounding thing was that on each end of that 2 miles was an antenna made of a Pringles can. So Pringles potato chips, come in that little silver can, and they were able to make the connection using those. And so those are the kind of lead users who have a great deal of understanding and who are pushing the limits of what we know. They don't have the kind of conscious competence, that is, that they don't know from a modeling and analytics, and they're not designing it that way. They're just trying things out, and they're learning from that. And so this might be a really good source of ideas, the kind of solutions that you might not come at in a sort of head-on, conventional way. The next thing to know is to understand how far do I invest. The first problem is understanding how broad is this chasm. Because if you don't put in enough resources and time and money and emotion into getting across this chasm and only put half of that in there, that's going to be a problem, right? You fall into the chasm. And so understand what it is you're going to take to invest. If this is the biggest project you've ever signed off on, you need to understand that and go ahead and commit. And if you're not willing to commit, you're not going to make it halfway, you're going to make it all the way across the chasm by resourcing it only halfway. The other thing to understand, though, is to understand that some things are, if it's not worth doing, it's not worth doing well. And so there we also need to understand how hard is the problem, right? We just talked about that. How hard is the problem we're addressing, and understand that to reach a certain point, we may have to say to ourselves, you know what, it's not worth getting there. And if you think about this in terms of, you're chances of success, if you don't see success, if you don't see that you can be successful and generally improve things, you may hit this point of diminishing returns, right? Where we invest more and we invest more and we invest more and we only get a little bit out of it. And so look at a curve like this, where more investment, 80% more investment only gets you 20% more performance, and you need to understand that and be able to say, okay, we've invested enough, we're at the point of diminishing returns, either let's ship it the way it is, even though it hasn't met specifications, that's like the A12, or let's stop the project because we're just putting good money after bad. And so again, we need to invest to a point. Understanding that if you avoid failure, that is, if you stop a project, even though you spent money and you stop a project, that failure is a success because you've avoided greater failure. And so if we stop something that's not going to work in the long run, we've stopped people from putting their time into it, we've stopped people from putting resources into it, money into it, all these things, and we can use those on other projects. And so we've avoided a great deal of opportunity costs by actually stopping something, by avoiding, allowing our failure to allow us to avoid larger failure, and then just put a stop on it. So, why some things are hard? Because the laws of physics, because we don't understand how to make matter behave, and if we pretend that we do, that's just a setup for trouble. And so we want to make sure we always stop and say, okay, do I understand what's going on here? And even if I don't, do I understand what I don't understand? Next up, time constraints.